Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Desi Popova and I'm going to be your Keras host today. We're going to talk about storytelling in interviews, and here with me is Meredith. I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Meredith, Benedict, and most recently, before coaching, which is my full-time job, I was at Facebook for over 7 years, and I held a variety of roles, including leadership roles, primarily in marketing. But the roles that I had in marketing were very cross-functional. And so I did interview, PMs, engineers, et cetera. So I have insight into that. And I worked a lot with those functions. I know a lot of you are applying for roles in the engineering and PM and TPM side. So, I can provide you with some insights there, especially if we work one-on-one in coaching. It's nice to meet everybody.
I'm going to give you some housekeeping information. We're going to begin with Meredith sharing some of her secrets about storytelling in interviews for FANG companies in particular. And throughout the presentation itself, you're going to have a chance to ask a question if it is in context. So if you feel that it's something applicable to what she's talking at this very minute, please drop it in the chat or in the Q&A section, and I'm going to ask Meredith the question on behalf of you. At the end of the event itself, we are going to give you an opportunity to ask as many questions as you wish. And for everyone who stays with us, Meredith is going to give you some exercises that you're going to have a chance to complete, and they will help you create the ultimate stories for your next job interview.
Yes.
Meredith?
Should I share my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. I am going to share right now. Does everything look good, Desi?
It looks good. Yep.
Okay, great. Let me actually delete some of these. Can you still see my presentation or?
We were seeing more than that.
Yes. Okay, there we go. Is that just the presentation? We're good, right? Okay, perfect. All right. So hello, everybody. Again, I'm Meredith Benedict. I mentioned a little bit about my Facebook experience. I also have a background in product management before that. And I worked with early stage companies at a VC before that. So I had this wild moment about 3 years ago. So I'm telling you my story right now, where I had a near-death experience. I found out the hard way that I have anaphylaxis response to a medication and ended up in the ICU for 3 days. And it was this transformational moment. And you don't need to have a near-death experience to have a transformational moment, but that's what happened to me. And decided to start thinking about really what it was that I wanted for my career at that moment. Started making shifts internally at Facebook, which is one of the beautiful things about these companies is that there's so many roles. And once you establish a reputation there, you have the capacity to really shift roles and try new things. It's actually encouraged at Facebook to do that because you bring a lot of your knowledge from your previous role into new roles. And so you're kind of carrying that culture and that knowledge across departments. So I started to shift around. I was still sort of doing some marketing, but ended up doing more diversity, equity, inclusion work. And then loved working with people, especially one-on-one and kind of understanding their stories, and decided to go full-time into coaching a year ago. And what I do with clients is a variety of things, depending on the stage of where you are, especially, in the stage of your career. So we might work together to figure out what your next step is. So it can be really early stage and kind of getting to know you and your values and what you care about and finding a good match for company and role, all the way to, thinking about the job search piece and getting your resume ready. And then obviously doing interview coaching, which is primarily what I do with Keras. And then once you're in the role, we can, or you get the role, we can do negotiation, coaching, positioning yourself for that first 90 days, which is so important. You're really establishing your brand, your value at the company in that first 90 days. So we can kind of set you up for success. Or if you want an internal promotion and you're doing interviews there, such as one of the participants here, we can talk through how to position yourself for those roles and scope increases, et cetera. I think one of the things that I love working with clients on is just finding their greatness. I think a lot of clients come in and they don't realize how impressive their stories are. And so I ask a lot of questions to my clients, and we're going to talk about some of those today to really like get at the root of it. You know, there's a lot that you don't realize is incredible about who you are and what you do. So usually I'll start with the story generation and finding those nuggets, and then we'll start to think of, you know, who you are as a person and how we can establish your brand in those interviews. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well today. So storytelling, what's so exciting about storytelling is it allows you to stand out in interviews, really in meetings as well. It's a very compelling medium. It's been around for, you know, since the beginning of humanity, basically. It's ingrained in who we are as humans. And ultimately, it stimulates the human brain. So when you're telling your story in an interview, you're getting that attention from the other person. A lot of people don't do storytelling in a compelling way in interviews. So this is a real differentiator. It also allows people to visualize kind of what you're telling, and that allows them to remember and sort of get you at a deep level, because they want to see if they want to work with you. And you know, ultimately the best way to do that is through storytelling. So usually what I'll do is I'll work with my clients to develop 3 to 5 really good stories that have all different angles in and answer a lot of the basic behavioral questions. I'll also work on case studies, but the 3 to 5 behavioral stories are at the core of how you can prepare for an interview. And especially at these big companies where they have so many great candidates, you know, you again want to stand out. So let's get started. I just want to ground us in the sort of the be all end all of interview formats. And this is at the heart of Caris and the founder of Caris in terms of kind of how they instruct you for preparing for interviews. And that's the STAR format. So the STAR format starts with the situation where you're really providing a little bit of context. And I encourage my clients to do that briefly, because the meat of it is really in the actions and results. And so we want to make sure we preserve time for that. And you want to allow for about 2 minutes to get through the story. So again, you want to make sure you're prioritizing action and results. Task is the role. That's the second step. Basically, like, what was it that you embarked on, you know, at a high level? So again, pretty short there. Then you have the actions, which really want to focus on what you did, you know, and I encourage my clients to say I, when appropriate, we, but I is important to showcase kind of what you are uniquely capable of. And then the results. And this is where I see a lot of my clients undersell themselves. You know, there are a tremendous amount of things that you probably did that probably came out of this example. And we'll talk a little bit about the different angles of how to evaluate results in a second. So the STAR format is really the ultimate be all end all of interview stories. But I'm going to encourage us to look at some of the more typical storytelling formats to feed the STAR. So first things first, actually, before this, I want to say that step one for me with my clients is to establish what it is the client, the company that they're interviewing is looking for. And then we start to match kind of this story to what that company is looking for. So what their culture is, what the role entails. And that's really your target customer, if you want to think about it from a marketing lens, which obviously I do because I'm a former marketer, still marketing in my day-to-day life in other ways. So who's that target customer, establishing what they're looking for, and then you can start adapting your story to some extent to that. You want it to be authentic, so not fully adapting. And the first stage of that is the hero. Who's the hero? I mean, there's always a hero of a story. And in this case, you are the hero. And this is a hard one for a lot of clients because they struggle with figuring out how to establish who they are without sort of seeming boastful. And there's also a lot of desire to see, to come off as humble. So there's ways around this, but it's an important thing to ground yourself in who you are, because that can subtly show up throughout the story. And ultimately, again, like I said, they want to know you to see if they want to work with you. I mean, that's at the end of the day. Do I want to sit next to this person in a meeting? Do I want to partner with this person? Do I think we'd really take a project to the next level? That sort of thing. So who's the hero? How can you think about that? I suggest stepping back and looking at your 360 feedback, your performance reviews. What are common themes? So for example, with me, one of the things that came up a lot was just my ability to get stuff done. So that's one of my themes. That's something that when I'm going into an interview, I want to highlight. I'm somebody who you don't need to give a bunch of instructions to. I can kind of figure out how to move forward with ambiguity. So what are those themes for you? And I encourage you to really sit and reflect and maybe even pull up those reviews and start to think about those themes. Another way in to figure out our hero is, as I mentioned before with my career coaching side, is what your values are. So what do you prioritize from this list, for example, in your day-to-day at work or your day-to-day outside of work? And ultimately, there's going to be, maybe you have all of these values in some regard, but which ones do you want to highlight and make sure that they truly see in your stories? So another way in with the hero. And I mentioned outside of work. I know a lot of clients are surprised when I give them this advice, but it's amazing, what you can bring in from who you are outside of work. And that can feed into the themes of you showing up and really differentiating yourself. For example, I had a client recently tell me that he's done theater since he was little, and that a lot of the principles he learned in theater are something he brings to the table each day at work. So we weaved some of those themes into his stories, and no doubt that felt humanizing for the interviewer. And so ultimately, those are a few ways that you can get at who you are and how you might want to position yourself. And what we're working towards is kind of that elevator pitch. And I actually like to think of it as a marketing one-liner. It's hard to get you to a place where you can say who you are in one line. So I want to just say, I know that this exercise is challenging. And if you need more words, great. But I encourage you to try to think about how to do it in a pithy way. And I'll show a little bit about an example from me to kind of guide you. But the framework here is I help customers. And in this case, your customers could be internal stakeholders. It's not necessarily external customers. Do results. And so what are you encouraging them, or ultimately, your impact has what on them, and then by doing solution. And so this is how you bring those results to life. So I know that can feel vague, so we'll show an example. I also want to just provide another framework that can help a little bit more with identifying that marketing one-liner. So you can basically just fill out the italicized portion. So the short description of who your customer is, again, can be internal. If you're an engineer, maybe you focus on your kind of like how you write code for your PM or for the team that you're working with, and what's differentiating about that. And then second, short description of the problem. In this case, with an engineer, maybe the problem is, the code was messy, and you are really talented at looking at messy code and finding a way to streamline it and make it more efficient. And then short description of the solution. Well, how do you do that? How do you, what's differentiating about what you do to take this sort of messy code and find ways to make it more efficient? And then short description of the value created. And this would be, maybe you sped up the app by X% because of your ability to take that messy code and really make it more efficient. So this is another way for you to think about it. And then again, I'm going to show you an example. So for me as a coach, I obviously wanted to figure out what I want to focus on as a coach and the kind of customers that I want to work with. And so I did a bunch of marketing exercises to do that. And using this framework, for me, my customer is motivated professionals. So people who want to career change, people who want a job at FANG companies, people who are looking for that promotion. So motivated professionals are my customer. And then what do they want? What's the solution? They want more from their careers. So ultimately, there's something about their current status that they want to change. And most likely they're wanting to maybe climb that career ladder. But often I see people wanting to do lateral moves because they're excited about some other opportunity. And then the way that I do that is through self-advocacy centered coaching. So how do you position yourself so that you can get that outcome that you want? And ultimately, that's essential. Sometimes you'll have a boss who's amazing and does that advocacy work for you. But until you state it out loud, until you say, this is what I want, it's unlikely you're going to get it. So I help a lot of clients with just that communication and with bosses to explain what it is that they want. So that's what I do. And then this is so that, and this is my greater mission of why I love being a coach, is so that they can live intentional, empowered lives, and that they're satisfied with their careers, and that just trickles out in the world. That's what I am excited about. And so ultimately, my one-liner, maybe it's not exactly that framework. I played around with the framework a little bit, and I think I encourage you to do so as well. Make it natural for you. Write it down so that you can imagine yourself telling this to somebody. So for my one-liner, it's I coach professionals to advocate for what they want in their careers so that they can live intentional, empowered lives. So you can see how that translated from the framework I just showed you. And could it be better? Always. That's the thing about marketing pitches, is you should always be iterating. You're kind of getting feedback. I tell somebody this and I see that it's not landing. Well, maybe I even ask them, like, what didn't land? You're always iterating. You're always evolving as a human. So this is going to evolve with you. You're growing, etc. And as you work, you're getting more data, you're getting more feedback from people, and that's feeding your feeding that pitch and refining that pitch.
Meredith, I have a question about it. Yeah. Because the one-liners would really depend on the company you're applying for, right? I mean, it should depend on who you are, but also it should take into consideration the company you're applying to work.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned before, the first stage is really defining what it is that the company is about, what their culture is, and then what the role is that you're applying for. So in the case of the engineer example that I mentioned, well, maybe, you've heard from insiders, or the description says that this role is really focused on speeding up the application, the app, right, for Facebook, for example. And so when you're positioning yourself as somebody who's just excellent at writing efficient code, that's catered to that role. And so part of it is understanding what the quote unquote problem is for that customer. In this case, it's Facebook. And so, yeah, you can adapt this to the role for sure. And I do that a lot, when we're defining kind of who you are as a person, we're thinking always in light of the role. That being said, the work that we do and what this presentation is doing often can be applied across roles. So it's not like you have to constantly do it differently for each role, but you're refining things, you're slightly adapting, just like you do your resume. You're not completely overhauling your resume, but you're thinking about what would this role, what's the alignment with this role in terms of the actions I've taken in my past. So you're slightly adapting, but the core is the same. Does that answer your question, Desi?
Yes, it does. Yes,
okay.
It does. And David has just added something in the chat. I'm gonna just read it. It's important that sentence translates to value as viewed by the recruiter, right? So he's asking a question.
Yeah. So hopefully I answered that kind of through your question, Desi, because it's sort of similar. When you're defining, and just going back to the slide of, the slide of the problem. So, who, short description of the problem, you're thinking about what's the problem that this role would solve from day one when you're applying, that role that you're applying to, what is it that you're doing? Why are they hiring for this role? So you're refining it according to the role itself. And sometimes it's hard, right? Like you don't always know all the ins and outs. So that's the other thing that I do as a coach. I have a lot of background in like what Facebook cares about. I've also, I got offers from Amazon and Microsoft. So I have a sense for kind of what they're looking for, and have, a network in some of these companies. And then if you have a network in these companies, really getting at that inside intel of what this specific role is solving for the company is again, a differentiator. Yeah. Okay. So, in terms of an exercise for you, and this will come through the PDF as well that Desi's sending, I want to just take a few moments for the audience to think about this one-liner and how they might approach it. And I don't know, Desi, do we have time to do that for each of these sections, or should I power through?
It's up to you.
Okay. Yeah, just take a minute. And a lot of you are interviewing for specific roles, so you can think about what the needs are in that role for the customer, which in this case is the company. Okay.
We have
knowing that I have a lot of
sorry, we have quite a few people live, so I expect that we'll have questions at the end for sure. So just to take this into consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was maybe enough. I wanted to rest on this slide for a little bit. But again, if you're attending, you'll get that PDF so you can have it in front of you and you can really take some time. This is important. Definitely take some time. Okay, so we have the hero, which is you. Now we're shifting into the plot. And this is how, each of those 3 to 5 stories will be architected. And I'll explain a little bit about how I'd encourage you to architect it. And then once you put that story together, you can put it back into the star format. There's a lot of overlap and alignment to the star format, so it's not going to be a huge shift. But the reason that I like starting with this sort of story framework is, again, it's an age-old practice. And this is actually the story of kind of the quest is what it's aligned to. And this is like a very old pattern of storytelling. And so you're utilizing that logic to develop out what you're going to say in that star framework. So the way that this one works is you start at the top and you basically start with that, they call it the call and the quest. And I'll explain a little bit more about what this means. But this is effectively kind of what the task is, or what you're going to embark on in this story. And then we go into the course, which is to some extent that action piece in the STAR framework, and the trials. So this is a huge thing that I work on with clients. When you're storytelling, there's always that conflict. There's always that, when you look at the arc of a story, it's sort of the top arc, and then you get to the resolution. So the reason conflict is a part of a core storytelling framework is because it's interesting, it's captivating. It's what keeps people on the edge of their seat. And obviously you don't have to manufacture conflict, but where it exists, it provides a real opportunity. Because ultimately, when you're looking at the last stage, which is insight and transformation, that's where you get to explain some of the things that you learned from that conflict. It also allows you to level up and showcase your leadership skills, because you figured out how to work with XFN, how to cross-functional players, how to resolve something that is somewhat inevitable in the workplace, which is disagreements. Perhaps, you think that the scope of the project is incorrect. I had a client the other day tell me, she was given a task and she didn't think that task was going to build up a long-term solution for the company. It was just a Band-Aid. Well, instead of just taking that at face value, she told senior stakeholders that she thought the scope should be larger, and actually raised her hand, which is amazing, to take on that larger scope. But that would be an example of a quote unquote sort of conflict or trial. So, and then finally, like I said, you have insight and transformation, which is the results element of STAR. And that's where you're showcasing kind of the impact that you had. Okay, so I know that is maybe a little esoteric. So the way that we can get at some of those stages of the story is through 5 key questions.
Meredith, just one question that is still related to the one-liners, and I thought we might as well cover it. What is a good way to come up with the one-liners for leadership positions? In that case, there are multiple customers, engineers, the organization, and senior leadership.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So there's a couple ways you can approach that. One is just taking that overarching view of the role and really like getting at what you're solving for that company. And so if you're going after a leadership role, it's probably some sort of strategic goal that you're solving for the company. The other way, because let's be honest, you also probably want to adapt to some extent your positioning to the interviewer. And so if you're interviewing with an engineer and a PM and a senior stakeholder, then maybe you adapt the one-liner to that person for the interview. And so you're kind of thinking about how you want to show up to that person. One example is, with some of my clients, we'll look at what the unique problems are of that particular interviewer, how they would want to partner with the role you're applying for. And then you're thinking about the role you're playing in that partnership with this person. And that's how you're adapting your stories. And that might seem overwhelming. It's like, that's a lot of work, but it really is it's slight iterations and adaptations. And so, the strategy that I mentioned in the beginning is just looking at the business problem. And the second strategy would be looking at the interviewer quote unquote problem that you would be helping them solve. That answer, do you think, the question? Yeah. Yep. Okay, cool.
Oh, good.
Great. Yay. So back to the 5 key questions to help you build out your plot. So first question is, it's that first stage, the call, like I said, sort of what is the overarching sort of problem you're solving. And so here, you'll start to think about, why was this project important to the business? Now, why were you being asked, or why were you identifying this particular problem or this particular project? And so, this could be, for example, one of my clients was doing sort of a bug fix overhaul. And it was because there were so many issues in the launch room that were coming up with bugs. And so there was a need to get proactively in front of it. So what is it that is kind of at the core of the project in terms of the business problem? The second is the quest. So again, still that first stage, but slightly different nuanced version of that first stage. How did you define the problem? You know, how in the solution, like when you were identifying what was underlying with that project in terms of the problem you were solving, after that stage, how did you flesh out the way that you were going to solve it? This is an opportunity to shine. Show your methodological approach, show your strategic lens in how you were going to solve it. Maybe you came up with, like a unique way to approach it in some capacity. And also when you're defining the problem, you're getting at more nuance, which is really important for showing that strategic lens. You're not just thinking about it as this sort of, like either or, I can either do this or that. It's like, no, there's a lot of nuance. There were many considerations in how I thought about what the problem was. It's not just a bug fix issue, it's a cultural issue. Thinking about some of these other elements of how you thought about the problem. And then the course. So again, what are your unique contributions to this particular project? And I think this is one that, again, clients struggle through because it's where you're showcasing, your greatness. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. This is also where we would have your hero elements, your one-liners, your what makes you different show up is within this stage. Trials, I already mentioned this. Where was there? I also like to think of where was there drama. Drama is another way to think about the conflict, but the challenges that you faced along the way. And then ultimately that allows you to showcase your insights. How did this project transform you? How did it transform the company? People want to work with self-reflective people that are open to feedback, people that are always looking at how they can be better. And this is an opportunity, this stage of the story is an opportunity for you to share that. Some people are scared to do this because it shows that they're not perfect. But nobody wants to work with somebody who they thinks they're perfect, because ultimately we're not. We're human, we have flaws, we all know this is a fact. And if you want to, again, humanize yourself in that interview, showcase where, maybe something went wrong, or just really a key learning that you had that you took into other projects. So I won't spend too much time on this because I know we want to save some time at the end, but I would, this is also going to be the PDF. I would encourage you for each story to think about how you'd answer these questions, and really kind of go deep here. And if we were to work together, which I hope I get to work with some of you, I would ask not only these questions, but a lot of follow-up questions that get at, if you're struggling figuring out how to answer them, that help you think about it in different ways, where we'll eventually be able to answer these questions. Because sometimes it can be challenging. It does require that kind of deep dive into self-reflection. And then one thing that I just wanted to note is for each section of this course, and of basically of the part that we've gone through so far, so the hero and the storyline, there's a mapping to some extent to some of the key questions you might get, and these are mostly behavioral, right? But for the hero, once you've defined kind of who you are as a person, that helps you answer, tell me about you, your weaknesses, which I know can be really hard for people. And that's where like the previous feedback piece can also sort of feed into that weaknesses question that you might get. And it's okay, right? Like do that self-reflection to like understand where you've got opportunity areas. It also might help you answer some of the management and leadership style questions if you're going into a leadership role. And then sometimes people ask you, like, where do you want to head next? What are your career goals? Why this job? And in the hero piece that we went through helps you with those kinds of questions. And the career goals is an interesting one because you want to showcase that you're heading somewhere bigger, but that this is a step along the way. And so there's some nuance, like there's some ways to massage it so that it helps you set you up for success there. And that is one that I'll spend some time on with clients usually. And then for the course, that sort of middle section of the storyline, or sorry, that beginning section of the storyline, that helps answer execution questions, productivity questions, your bias towards action, which is usually what these FANG companies are looking for, is that you are somebody who moves quickly but thoughtfully. And then ambiguity, which is another key theme that comes up in these FANG interviews, is that you don't need to be told what to do, you identify what to do. And that even if you're told what to do, you're able to take probably a chaotic situation, because a lot of these companies are dealing with a lot of uncertainty. They're innovators in their space. There's not like sort of set courses all the time. You're able to set that course without much direction. And then in the trials and insight transformation phase, that's where something like the failure might come up. You know, I mentioned that ability to self-reflect. The conflict, like I said before, you know, cross-functional style might come up, and then you know, cross-functional pushback as well. So there's just some mapping to some of the topics we've already reviewed to key questions. One thing I do with clients is once we've fleshed out these stories, we'll then map it to, I have like a bank of, you know, hundreds of questions. I won't map to hundreds, but we'll map to some of the ones that we think will be likely to come up in the interviews. And then, you know, I'll also do like an outline that you can like click on if you want to in the interview to remind yourself of the story that particular question maps to. All right, so how did it end? This is the exciting part.
Before we continue, sorry, can I just ask a couple of questions?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Because we do have them, and I think they fit. So one person is asking how many minutes we should take to explain behavioral questions.
Yeah, so I generally rule of thumb say 2 to 3 minutes, which is probably going to have you really worried because it's hard to get it and distill it down. But this is, again, the work I do with clients, but also something you can do with yourself, you know, practice and really question, like, is that answering one of the questions that I just went through for the plot? Is that important? A lot of people over-index on the situation piece, which is the leading into kind of what the story is. People don't need all that context. You know, you can usually cut that back to a sentence. So 2 to 3 minutes is my rule of thumb. However, there are times in interviews where the interviewer doesn't have a lot of questions. And so you kind of need to give them the information without having them prompt it. And in this case, I think telling a longer story is fine because you're trying to get at a couple of the angles of how you want to sell yourself. But if they are kind of regularly asking you questions and pushing things along 2 to 3 minutes, they might have follow-ups. So you have the opportunity to showcase a little bit more about that story. But actually what that affords you is the ability to use different angles of the same story throughout the interview, which is why that 3 to 5 is actually like a pretty robust set. So brevity is key. It also shows that you're somebody who has that strategic lens. You're not somebody who just kind of doesn't understand when their audience is not interested. You usually see the glazing after 2 to 3 minutes, the like not as engaged. And then also you're able to bubble up kind of things you're out of the weeds in how you thought about that example. You're not kind of just not thinking strategically, which is so key for senior stakeholder communications. So you're showing I can talk to senior stakeholders. I know how to distill this complex thing into a shorter bite-sized thing. Yeah. Any other questions? You said, Desi, there were a couple.
No, I'll keep the next one for the end.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
Cool. So how does it end? This is also a key piece that can be challenging, like I said in the beginning. Remember, you're the hero. We want to celebrate you. We want to see your success. That's the exciting piece of the hero. Think about any movie that you watch. You know, you're rooting for this person and you want to make sure that they had success. So a couple of questions to think about on these two sides of the coin. For the business outcomes piece, you want to ask yourself, did it improve profits? Did it decrease costs? Another thing that some people don't remember to include is, did this create this particular project that you had a significant impact on? Did that have long-term value for the company in some other way? Like, did you define a process that they're actually using today? That bug fix example, that was a process that affected hundreds of internal stakeholders and was launched to a different team. So that's like longevity of business outcomes that are internal, maybe not quantifiable always, but really essential. You know, you're strategic enough that you thought about how to do this example such that it's replicable in other parts of the company. And then sometimes people are like, I don't have like the quantifiable metrics for the business outcomes. So sometimes we'll look at proxy measurements, you know, something that kind of is an indicator that was going to long-term impact profits. So we'll get creative there sometimes. And then on the right-hand side, reputational outcomes. So what did this do for you? You know, I had a client the other day who said, after this, I got promoted. You know, or after this, I got some public praise in some capacity within the company, or external praise. Maybe you presented it at a conference. So what were the things that changed your, you know, your feedback and your performance reviews? Like really highlighting that, that it wasn't just about the business outcomes, but there was something there that allowed you to be recognized. And so I know we're not going to do too much on exercises, but I would recommend, and this is in the PDF, that you really take some time to think about this. You want it to really land. It's important that that they understand that you understand what is impactful for a given business. So take that time to think through this. And then sort of the last stage of this storytelling exercise is to put it all together. So I already mapped some of this to the STAR framework, but basically the hero is sort of throughout the STAR framework. You want to figure out ways to position yourself in various stages, but it's most likely going to show up in the action and results phase of STAR. And then for the plot piece, that's kind of action a lot of times, especially if you're bringing in that drama to the plot or to the action phase and how you handled some of that conflict. And then, you know, the ending of the storytelling is very clearly mapped to the results, your quantitative and qualitative outcomes. And then your key learnings. That was another piece of the results or ending phases, is how you grew as a person and as a professional. And I believe that's it. So we have some time for questions. If you have any, happy to answer anything. And thank you so much.
Everyone, please stay with us. I just want to make sure I don't miss any questions. Please post them in the Q&A. You'll find it in at the bottom. There's a Q&A. More to, which one is it? Not sure for the viewers, but it would be to the right-hand side. You'll find the Q&A and you can post your questions there, because in the chat I might miss it. There are quite a few of you. Okay, I already see questions coming in.
That's great.
That's what I thought. This is really great. That's why we encourage you to join us live. And at the very end of this workshop, I'm going to send out the key exercises that Meredith has prepared for you from this presentation. We will not be sending out the presentation itself. Okay, so also a surprise for everyone who joins live, I'm going to stop the recording and I'll give you a chance to really just ask anything you want to ask comfortably.
Yes, of course, of course, of course.
So I'll start with the first one. How do you use this? How do you use the STAR? I mean, the STAR method for questions like, what is your management style? Questions like this don't seem to fit in the problem, conflict, action, and result.
Yeah, two options here. One is to kind of go back to that hero section and think about the one-liner in terms of leadership and kind of what you do as a leader. And then one other thing I'll sometimes do with clients is, especially for leadership roles, you want to show that you have philosophies about things. It's like you're senior enough that you've gone through a bunch of examples of like challenges. And so you have key learnings from that bubble into sort of philosophies. So like, for example, one of my clients said that he sees himself as a servant leader, and he gave some examples of how that was real and how that showed up. And so you could actually use the STAR framework for that if you want to, or you can just give kind of the highlight of the servant leadership trait, and also maybe some reasons that he ended up in that position that were hard, that were challenging, that taught him the importance of servant leadership. Or perhaps he saw somebody in a leadership position that he admired that had that working style. So especially for leadership related questions, I definitely suggest showcasing your philosophies on things. This can also show up and tell me about you. This is one I work on a lot with clients, because a lot of people don't realize how powerful the tell me about you question is. It's really your chance to show that hero side. And so people usually do a resume dump and they'll just kind of go chronologically backwards. That's not utilizing that question to its fullest capacity. So we'll bubble up those philosophies or those key traits, the things that people are saying about you and your feedback, and we'll architect it against that. And within those themes, you can do a STAR story. You absolutely can. You might abbreviate it slightly, but the STAR has a place in these examples. It's just not like you're going to architect the whole answer according to STAR. Yeah.
We have another one.
Okay.
After the interview, companies don't give you any feedback. They say that they're just not moving forward. How do you improve when you don't have any feedback?
Oh, this is the hardest. And FANG companies can be very hit or miss with this. So I know that could be really frustrating as a candidate. I have noticed more recently, randomly, that a lot of my clients are getting feedback. So I'm hopeful that that's like a culture shift, but who knows? If you don't get feedback, I think at the end of the day, it's just that self-reflection piece and utilizing interview best practices like this storytelling to think about shifting, how you show up in the next interview. I do have some clients that, that are able to, despite not getting feedback, say, yeah, I don't think I did X, Y, or Z as well as I could. And part of what they're looking for is like, what's happening with the other person? Are they seeming like excited about this? Do they seem like they're understanding, like I'm answering it in a way that is, compelling for them. And so I think it's helpful even just right after the interview to jot down, how do I think that went? But I know that can be really frustrating, and I just want to acknowledge that piece of it. Also ask the recruiter, even if they push back, ask again if you can, because it's worth getting that feedback directly from them if it's feasible and there's no harm in asking.
There's something I'm working on. In fact, I'm working on new packages from our coaches. And I do have an idea about solving to an extent this problem. It would be like, okay, for example, if one of your clients had an interview, they didn't receive feedback, but they know what they were asked, they know how they answered it. So they can literally book a session with the coach, for example, you describe the entire situation, and you're very likely to find out what may have gone wrong.
Yes.
So this is one way to actually get feedback. I know I personally would love something like that in their situation. So this is one way to approach it. And of course, self-reflection, but then again, you're not sure. So if you really want to dive in deeper, you can actually get help from the CARES coaches and from Meredith and figure out, okay, what went wrong. So find a way to remember everything that took place, I would say, and look for feedback from Meredith, for example.
You know what? That's a great call out, Desi, because I've had clients who not only did self-reflection, but wrote down what they said after the interview so they'd remember, and we reviewed it. I kind of forgot about that, but absolutely, that's a great way to understand what might have happened. So yeah, I would recommend after the interview, write down your self-reflection and the actual answers that you had, so that you have that opportunity to put that in front of somebody else and hear what might have been missing. Yeah, great one.
Okay, so next one. Are 3 to 5 stories enough for the entire interview process?
Yeah. So it depends on how good the stories are. I have a client who had a story where we fleshed out 4 sub-stories. So I do think it depends on the depth of the story. There's some clients who come in with a story that's just like, pretty high level or not super in depth. So I do think, and it depends on how many rounds the interview is as well. So I have some clients who have like 4 rounds, and obviously we're going to need to start fleshing out more stories for that. But I think it's a good starting point. And if you find yourself in more rounds, sometimes they'll actually ask you explicitly to not repeat stories, in which case we'll have to flesh out more than 3 to 5. But any more can be a little overwhelming, especially in the first sort of round of interviews and some early stages of interviews. So I use that as a rule of thumb.
Okay, so next one. It's a very good one. What to expect during an interview with top management, vice president IT position, for example?
Just hypothetical.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're probably going to be surprised at how many like tell me about you questions they'll ask. It's going to be more, most likely more informal, less like, drawn out case study or really specific behavioral, because again, they're operating at that higher level and they're expecting you to take some of these general questions and shine. And know that, like I said, with tell me about you, know that that's your opportunity to showcase who you are as a person at a higher level. There might be some kind of broad questions, thinking about that ambiguity trait that they're looking for of, how would you approach, for example, I was fleshing out a case study with a client the other day. How would you approach the algorithm for Airbnb guests? But they're going to look for just that high level framework thinking. And they're not necessarily going to want the numbers of how you would flesh out that case study. So I think any question from somebody that high level is going to be at that sort of more basic kind of question or high level case study question. But this is where you definitely want to flesh out your leadership traits and your philosophies and bring those in, because if you're interviewing with a VP, that probably means it's a senior role.
Thank you. And another one, on average, how much time does one need to spend to build these stories?
Yeah, great question. So with my clients, in coaching, I usually work with them for 5 hours for an interview. or for a round of interviews, I should say. And then there's also generally homework. So I just want to highlight, it's not just 5 hours usually. I know that that might sound like a lot or a little, but that tends to be kind of where the sweet spot is. And with the homework, maybe it's like more like 10. But it varies on people, you know, if they're industry shifting, it might be more because there's a lot more that we need to flesh out in terms of, you know, parallels with what you've done and how it shows up in this new industry. Yeah, say 5 to 10 minimum. Yeah.
Thank you. And just so everyone knows, we have many questions in the pipeline, and I'm not sure I will be able to answer all of them. So if you have any questions, unfortunately, please, I have to ask you to stop posting and now so we can answer all the questions that have been asked so far. And of course, I just want to remind everyone, you can book a 15-minute free call with Meredith, and you can ask her your questions in case we don't get a chance to answer today. I'm going to share with all of you her profile, and you'll have a chance to ask. I'm gonna give you another one. 1 second.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to highlight the 15 minutes. And then also if your questions are like further or more personal, obviously we can do sessions together, and I have some packages that are available. I think, Desi, we're going to do a discounted package for the audience here as well.
Yeah, everyone has been so great, and I'm so happy that you agreed. We were just discussing with Meredith. Everyone who is here is going to receive a 15% discount on a packaged offer. We're going to send you more information in an email, so please keep an eye on the exact offer. So let me just have a look. There are some questions in the chat. Is it necessary to have a unique story per question? Can stories be repeated for 2 leadership questions? I think in a way you kind of mentioned that they should keep going back and forth. So can stories be repeated throughout the interview?
Yeah, if it's like one interview, I would only repeat a story if it's sort of a sub story, if there's different sub stories, right? Like I wouldn't repeat the same story, that exact angle. But if it's like a huge story that we've fleshed out different pieces of it that can answer different questions, yes, absolutely. And then generally across interviewers, you can also repeat, you know, ideally you're using those different angles about the story, but you can repeat unless they tell you they don't want you to repeat. So that has showed up a couple of times with my clients. And then again, we're fleshing out a lot more as a result.
Okay, so next one. What should be the percentage share of each star element while drafting a story?
Great question. So I mentioned situation should be very brief and task as well. I would say maybe between those two, like perhaps 10%. And then action should be the bulk of it. I would say between 70 and even 80%. And so then that leaves results at 10 to 20. But action is really where you shine. Unless there's something really differentiating about what you did with the task. Again, like you define the problem in a really unique way.
So thank you. I have actually shared the exercises PDF that we have. And I will continue with the rest of the questions, but before we continue, I will share with all of you Meredith's profile at Kara's, where you can book the free 15-minute call. In case you have a question or you want to see what it would be like to work with her, get to know her on one-on-one, you have this opportunity. And I'll continue with the questions. In order not to make this recording too long and to encourage everyone else who watches the recording to join us live next time, I'm going to stop the recording itself. So if you have any stage fright, it's over. We're stopping the recording. You can actually, yeah.
I'll also stop
join us.
Stop sharing as well, so I can.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Up. There we go.
So thank you very much. And for everyone who watches the video, enjoy. And Meredith is going to wait for you for a free 15-minute call.